What's the buzz around the Broncos heading into free agency? After almost 10 years of experience covering this beat, we've got the inside information to break it down, and we're going to do that. The 5 biggest things I'm hearing heading into free agency with Henry Chisholm, Zach Stevens. And the first one, they're loving the linebackers out at Dove Valley. Apparently, the Broncos want to make a splash in free agency by going after one of the top linebackers. That's what I'm hearing. And Henry, what a perfect year to be able to go after one of these linebackers because you have so many big names. Zach Bond, Dre Greenlaw, and the one that I think people need to keep their eye on from the Broncos perspective is Nick Bolton, the dog from the Kansas City Chiefs. Only 24 years old. By the time the season turns, he'll be 25 years old. So you're not only getting a guy for now, you're getting a guy for the future.
Yeah, and it's always interesting with linebackers because it seems like they, more than most other positions, are scheme dependent. Like you take a guy from one scheme and put him in another, and all of a sudden he looks like a different player. With Zach Bond being an example of that in a good way, because they played him however they did in New Orleans and changed things up a bit with the Eagles. So I love the idea because obviously you need to go get another linebacker. I mean, if the season started today, Lavelle Bailey is starting for you, and most of you probably don't know who that is. Yeah. So you got to go get one. You might as well go get a good one if you have to go get one. But you better be scouting correctly because there's so many of these guys where it feels like they're going to work and the next thing you know, it just doesn't work out.
Well, from what I've heard, the Broncos are in love with Nick Bolton. And look, you look at the tape, he is the centerpiece of that elite Chiefs defense for 4 years now. So he's only been in the league for 4 years, has plenty of time to continue to even get better. And that's a guy that I've been told the Broncos are really high on. Let's move on to the second thing I'm hearing heading into free agency, and that is Bo Nix's backup. I think is going to be a familiar face. Sean Payton absolutely loved the backup room or the quarterback room last year with backup Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. I think in an ideal world, Sean Payton keeps both of them. I think that both of them, though, just don't make sense financially to keep to be backup. So I do think the Broncos bring back one of those guys, and my gut tells me right now that it's going to be Jarrett Stidham who's back as the Broncos' backup quarterback.
Yep. I mean, I'd imagine they'd like to have Zach Wilson. It's just that financially, bringing back Jarrett Stidham is going to save you a bunch of money compared to going and getting Zach Wilson because, you know, we've seen guys kind of bounce back and, you know, some guys maybe only get an opportunity to prove that they can be a starter in the NFL. But, you know, you have your like Ryan Tannehills out there, some of those guys who are able to find fresh starts. And there's just more value in a guy like that, a Zach Wilson type who might be able to be a starter still versus a Jarrett Stidham, who you kind of know what he is. He's a career backup. And if you're paying half price for Stidham, that's probably the smart move.
And speaking of money, Broncos aren't going to be able to save much money. When it comes to Nick Bonitto, he is now contract extension eligible after wrapping up his third season. And in his third season, he burst onto the league. 14 sacks. That's the third most in the NFL. And I'm told, talking to sources around the league, that the starting point for his next contract is going to be $23 million per season. You might say, like, whoa, that's a lot for a guy that's only had one good season. Well, the top pass rusher right now is Nick Bosa with the 49ers, making $35 million. So if they sign him to an extension this year, it's going to be a starting point of negotiations of $23 million per season. And I don't expect this deal to get done until closer to the start of the season. Just like Pat Surtain last year didn't sign his massive contract until just a week before the season started. That's what I expect to happen with Nick if he does get that contract this year.
Yeah, because the Broncos have plenty of cap space, $40 million or so. But sometimes it's easier to add more contracts in once you've gotten through the offseason, you see where things stand and see how things kind of shake out the next couple of years. So if you wait to make that deal then, similar to Courtland Sutton last year, you know, you wait, and because of that, they throw the void years in, realizing that they'd maybe overspent a little bit because they knew that they could throw those in. So yeah, it just makes sense to kind of do things in order and then work that deal to make it fit for you, because all he's going to care about is how much money he gets.
Well, and I don't think Courtland Sutton's worried about his deal, because I do believe, and from talking to sources around the Broncos, they are going to give Courtland Sutton an extension this season going into the final year of his deal. We know last year he sat out all of OTAs until mandatory minicamp because he wanted a new deal. Broncos didn't give him a new deal, instead gave him $1.5 million of incentives, which he hit. That's not going to be the case this year, from my understanding. The Broncos will get a deal done with Courtland Sutton to keep him happy, not only this year, but for the long term. He's important to the Broncos offense. He's important to Sean Payton, but he is so important to Bo Nix. He proved that last year he was Bo Nix's favorite target by far, so the Broncos are going to make sure that he is Bo Nix's favorite target for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, that one's pretty simple because, you look at the defensive line, for example. Next year, you're going to have to pay Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Malcolm Roach, and having a little bit of flexibility there kind of makes sense. Whereas with the receivers right now, it would be a massive surprise if Courtland Sutton isn't one of your 2 or 3 best receivers this year. And because of that, you can expect him to be one of those guys moving forward. Now, there's a small chance that you give him the extension and then, Devon Bailey goes for 1,000 yards. Marvin Mims goes for 1,000 yards. Troy Franklin goes for like 750. And you say, maybe Courtland Sutton is, expendable. Maybe we didn't need to give him this deal. Very, very unlikely that you hit on all of those guys in that way, and you get to the point where you're saying, maybe we should have let him walk and spent that money elsewhere.
And the final takeaway, speaking of receivers, there was a great receiver on the market, Deebo Samuel. The Broncos did not trade for him. He's now shipped off to the Commanders for a 5th-round pick, and I'm told the Broncos had zero interest in Deebo for a lot of reasons. One, I don't think that they were very interested in the receiver that he was right now. But 2, a lot of people thought, man, he's the perfect Joker situation. Broncos want a Joker. He's a Joker. Not in the Broncos' eyes. Sean Payton doesn't really view receivers as jokers. And you might say, well, Marvin Mims last year was their joker. Not really. Marvin Mims was just a versatile receiver. That is not the role that Sean Payton wants a receiver to be in, as that joker role. And he doesn't view what Marvin Mims did last year as the joker position. Sean Payton wants a joker to be a tight end or a running back. So while it made sense maybe initially from an outside perspective, like, oh my gosh, bring Deebo in, he's a joker, Broncos had no interest for multiple reasons.
Yeah. No, and it just didn't make sense. It's too much money. Giving up a draft pick to pay that money is a bad idea. Deebo tweeted that he was going to get into better shape. I'll believe it when I see it because it seems like he kind of is what he is at this point. And that's, a good receiver, but just not a $20 million a year receiver now that he's lost some of that athleticism.
All right, that's what I'm hearing heading into free agency. Make sure to stay tuned to the DNVR Broncos podcast for more.